Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Before we begin today's session of the comprehensive news analysis, once again a gentle reminder, if you have still not subscribed to the YouTube channel of BYJU'S IAS, do it right away because 30th of April is the day that the Target Prelims 2022 crash course begin that will cover the entire syllabus of the Prelims examination and an entire coverage of last year's current affairs. Let's begin today's session with the first article that talks about the negative impact that the school closures have had in India because of the ongoing pandemic. Now, this is not one of those topics that we are seeing for the first time. In fact, in the past year or so, we have seen multiple articles in the newspapers which have been advocating that the schools in India should open up and we should not worry about the COVID-19 completely going away before we open up the schools. Anyways, if you look across the world, India is one of those nations where the schools have been closed the longest time period. The article also tells us that in India, schools have been closed for around 570 to 600 days, which is an immense loss of education, especially for children who are in the formative ages right now. And this has impacted negatively many more students who can't afford smartphones, who can't afford tablets, and even in those places where there is just one laptop or one tablet at their home and there are more than one children to attend classes. The author here, who has written a lot of articles on this particular topic, is making a point based on a recent joint report published by UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank. The title of the report is The State of the Global Education Crisis, A Path to Recovery. Now, this report came up in December 2021. It is not just based on India, it is giving us a global picture about the impact that education has had to suffer due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It says that there is no evidence to suggest that children are at a higher risk. In fact, we have more and more evidence to suggest that just like all other people in every other age group now, children will also get infected with COVID. But thankfully, every study suggests that the adverse impact of COVID on children is one of the least that are being seen around the world. So our planning to open up the schools only when there are zero cases or to close the schools again if there are a few cases that are coming up is not scientific at all. In fact, in the past few months, we have seen a lot of states opening up their schools. With that, we have also seen a few schools having certain cases of COVID coming up once again. With this, we have again started the demand of having hybrid schools. Hybrid schools means kind of giving an option to the student if he or she wants to come to the school physically, they can. Otherwise, they can attend it online. But this is not how a normal or a proper school would work. Imagine being a teacher and then having to teach half of the students in the class and half of the students online. Or imagine being a student for that matter, not knowing whether you are going to school, whether you are going to meet your peers or not, and just being at home and trying to learn from that tablet. It is a great detriment to the learning levels of children that are being seen around the world and not just in India. Yes, it is acceptable that whenever there is a news that school children are catching COVID, it scares everyone, and it should. But the fact is that you are not sure if a child has gotten COVID. Did he get COVID from the school only or from any of the family members? Because just imagine this. A child is going out of his or her house not just for school. Now you see the markets are flooded, people are going for vacation, swimming pools are open, malls are open, hotels are open. So how can you be so sure that if a child got COVID, it was because he or she went to the school and not because he or she went to the shopping mall or on a vacation or from a family member for that matter. So to blame the schools and to put all the onus on the schools and the teachers only is very unfair because that would have a great impact, especially in the long run. We may not realize it right now, but this generation who has been out of school for a couple of years would have a very difficult time in coping up with all those learning grades in the coming years. That is the point of the entire article. The article is saying that the state governments can learn from each other's example. He is giving an example of Delhi government's mentor-teacher initiative. Now, I personally was a part of this initiative, so I can tell you what this was. So what the Delhi government did was, they invited teachers or people in the field of education or experts who would want to be mentor teachers. Mentor teacher means an expert who would be over 15 to 20 teachers. So 15 to 20 teachers, if they have a problem in the classroom, if they don't know how to communicate certain stuff to the students, if they don't know how to tackle difficult students, the teachers can then get in touch with the mentor teachers, and the mentor teachers will kind of mentor the teachers and help them come out of difficult situations in the classroom. This is very necessary because we have to understand the impact of pandemic is not just on the children. It is exactly the same or even more on the teachers. A lot of our teachers have not been very hands-on with using technical stuff. Many of the teachers during the pandemic would have used online classes for the first time. Many of them would have used Zoom or Skype for the first time ever in their lives when they did not even expect it. And at the same time, you had a lot of classes where the students made it very difficult for the teachers to actually ensure that the class is conducted properly. So where would the teacher go if he has a problem or she has a problem? This is not to say that the other states did not. Other states also took similar kind of initiatives. Also, the problem is not really much in private schools. The private schools where they have good infrastructure, where they have good money, handled it much better. There are many private schools that I know personally that gave laptops to students who did not have laptop at their houses, asking them to keep it during the pandemic and then return it later on. But obviously not every school or every student could afford it. So this is a big disparity between the students of richer schools as compared to the students who did not really go to those schools. This is what we have to address. The author also says that this requires more government spending on education. Right now, the government spends about 3% of the GDP on education, which is much lower even when you compare it with middle income and low income nations. One other aspect that we usually ignore when it comes to school children specifically is the aspect of mental health issue. Now, India and many other developing countries for that matter have not been very comfortable with the idea of mental health. Thankfully, in the past few years, with a lot of celebrities coming out talking about depression and mental health issues, we have started to talk about it. But still, we don't consider a mental health issue as being something that can affect the children. We always think that yes, this is something that may affect the adults but not the children. Children also, when they are not meeting their peers, they are not having to go out to school, they are not meeting their teachers, they also get a lot of anxiety. So for that also there needs to be certain importance given. What Delhi has done is, in March 2022, Delhi government started 20 school health clinics, especially for children, to make sure that they can come out of their mental health issues. And similar initiatives can be taken by other states as well. Also, in the past couple of decades, school had become much more than just the centers of education. With the introduction of the midday meal program, they had become the place where students could be given good enough nutrition even if they could not afford it at their houses. That also has stopped. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the midday meal scheme had to be stopped in between, and that has again led to a negative impact on the nutrition of the children from those families, especially who could not afford 2 meals on the plate every single day. All that can be solved if we put our focus on running our schools properly and not be deterred by a few cases that are coming up, because now COVID has become an integral part of our lives. There will not be a situation where we will not have any other case. Now, the article in the very beginning made a mention of the State of Global Education Crisis report that is written by multiple organizations together. Now, because you would not go through the entire report on your behalf, I went through the entire report and I'm trying to give you the important pointers from that report. So, the report, as I said, is not India focused, it is focusing on multiple nations, but I've just taken out certain important pointers from that. The report gives examples of how education has been impacted in multiple nations. The report says that in Brazil, for example, the students learned only 28% of the things that they would have otherwise learned in the classes. Means 72% decline in the learning objectives was seen in Brazil. There's also an example given of Karnataka rural in India. It says that the share of grade 3 students in government schools in Karnataka rural able to perform simple subtraction fell from 24% in 2018 to only 16% in 2020. So it was anyways dismal in 2018 and it has become even worse because of the pandemic. There is an estimate that the global learning crisis seen mainly in the developing world will translate into a loss of $17 trillion in lifetime earning of these students when they grow up and they start to earn because of the education gap that they had to suffer. Globally, on an average, the schools were closed for 224 days in nations across the world. As we discussed earlier, in India, the time period for school closure was much longer because we were being extra defensive and we had good enough reasons for that. But now we should learn and we should not let single or a few COVID cases change our entire decision, because closing down schools can be very detrimental now. More than 37 crore children missed out on school meals during the school closures, mainly because for many of these children, school was the only reliable source of food and daily nutrition in India and many other developing nations. Now, the report also gives us some other examples of how nations across the world have decided to change their education pattern because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me give you certain examples. So in France, students passing out from upper secondary school leaving examinations can now choose 4 subjects instead of 3. So earlier they had to choose 3, now they have an option to choose from 4 subjects. So they are given more freedom. In Austria, the number of compulsory modules for higher education entrance qualification was reduced from 4 to 3. So the number of subjects that you had to study in Austria have come down. Germany also has done the same. They have reduced the content and they have tried to adapt the content to the actual curriculum that is being taught at the school. So a lot of countries have taken initiatives to make sure that the workload on the students and their mental health is reduced. There is one more interesting data point given in this report, that is about how many teachers have been fully vaccinated in countries across the world. Now you have to understand, with no specific medicine available, the vaccines are the only way to ensure that we are protected against COVID. There's nothing more that you can do right now, right? If you have to live your life, the best that you can do is ensure that you are fully vaccinated. Now, if you look at the number of teachers who are fully vaccinated, and this data is from September 2021 and in some cases after that. So India's vaccination rate has been pretty good. If you look at India's numbers right now, the number of teachers fully vaccinated are close to or were close to 80% by September 2021. So I'm imagining it would have gone even further. By now it would have reached 90% or maybe more than that. So there is nothing more that you can do apart from that. This is our best line of defense and we have adopted this. So you can't even say that we are waiting because we have to get more teachers vaccinated. So as per the report, there is every single reason that we should open schools completely as soon as possible. The next article that we have here is making a proposition. That is, use of hydrogen as a future energy fuel has to be looked into very seriously. The authors here are making a point that our energy independence can be achieved through hydrogen and it will lead to multiple great things in the future. Number one, it will reduce the environmental pollution. Second, it will also reduce our dependence on other sources of energy such as fossil fuel, etc. Third, our focus on electric cars, etc., electric vehicles can also be shifted to hydrogen, because hydrogen powered cars can go for longer range, can be charged much easily, can be refueled much easily. And then one very interesting point is that India is at an advantage because of our geography and we can make very good use of hydrogen as a fuel in the future, and we should pay attention to all the experts and their advice in this particular regard. The reason for this article to come out is that the government of India in Feb 2022 released India's green hydrogen policy. This policy has addressed multiple challenges. For example, the waiver of interstate transmission charges. That means, let's say that hydrogen is produced in the state of Gujarat and it has to be transported to the state of Assam. Now the interstate transmission charges from one state to the other, that will be a very high cost, and the government has now come in and said that we are waiving off those charges. The policy also talks about giving time-bound clearances and also trying to boost India's energy transition to move towards green hydrogen as soon as possible. Now, if you actually see right now, India's per capita energy consumption is 1/3 of the global average. So despite all the criticism that the developed nations do of India about our pollution, energy consumption, etc., the fact remains that India on a per capita basis is still much lower as compared to the global world average. And when you compare it to the US, the situation is even worse. Per capita, the Indian citizens consume 1/20th of the power that the US citizens consume. And even with these numbers, India at many places is lacking energy. That is why we see power cuts across the country, especially in tier 2, tier 3 and rural India. That is why we have to look at future. With increasing population, increasing industrialization, India's demand for energy will only increase in the future. And the answer to those problems, as per the author, is hydrogen, which is the new age fuel. Now, let me tell you in very simple terms how we get hydrogen. See, hydrogen is a very light element, and that is why it is very difficult to get hydrogen in its pure form. So how do we get hydrogen is you take water, through the use of electricity, you try to dismantle water into hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen is then released, hydrogen is what you get. This process is called electrolysis. So electricity is needed to break water into hydrogen and oxygen, and as a result of which we get hydrogen in its purest form, which can be used for energy generation. Now the good part about hydrogen is that it can be stored on a very large scale and for very long duration. And this goes in line with India's ambitious plan to achieve 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. As I said earlier also, the good part about hydrogen is that our focus on vehicles that run with renewable energy can also be something that can be solved with hydrogen. Because hydrogen vehicles would ensure much quicker refueling, much longer ranges. That is a problem with electric vehicles right now. Part of the reason why people don't want to buy electric vehicles right now is you're not sure of the range. And if you run out of battery on a highway and you don't see a charger somewhere near you, you can be in a very bad situation. And all that can be solved by hydrogen very easily. Not just this, hydrogen also has a lot of industrial applications. It can be used in sectors of iron and steel, aluminium, copper, etc. and make sure that we reduce the usage of carbon and we improve the environment in the country and around the world. Now, it is not that this is just in the experiment stage. In fact, we do use hydrogen as a fuel, although at a very small scale. So, India's hydrogen consumption right now, or let's say in 2020, was 7 million tons. It is anticipated that by 2050, it will be four-fourths, that is, it would reach 28 million tons. Now, as I said, getting hydrogen as a fuel is not that easy. You need to have electrolysis as a process that requires electricity. Now, electrolysis takes place inside a specific instrument. That instrument is called electrolyzer. Now, electrolyzers are now in very huge demand because it is not just India, but countries across the world such as Japan, South Korea, America, that are all working towards exploring hydrogen as a source of energy. Because of that, the demand for electrolyzers is at an all-time high because every country wants it because they are an essential part of producing hydrogen. So, globally, the capacity to produce electrolyzers in 2021 was only 300 megawatts. Now, with India increasing its usage of hydrogen in the coming years, we alone would need a lot more electrolyzers as compared to what the world supply right now is. So, that can also be a big problem for India. The other big problem is that the process of electrolysis, in which we break down water into hydrogen and water, would require a lot of water. That is, for every 1 kg of hydrogen to be produced, we require about 9 liters of water. So you can see in a country such as India, where water has always been a touchy issue, the amount of water that is required for making enough amount of hydrogen can also be a problem in the long run. In this article, what the authors have done is, they have given ideas for both the sides. First, how to increase the demand for hydrogen, and then how to increase the supply for hydrogen. On the demand side, they are saying that the government should give a mandate to mature industries like refining and fertilizers that they should use hydrogen products as much as possible. Also, industries that manufacture low emission hydrogen based products should be incentivized so that they know that they have the government's backing. The government can also work on blending hydrogen with natural gas to act as a big booster shot. Government can also go ahead with putting on carbon tariffs. That is, the companies or industries that are using carbon resources can be penalized or taxed at a higher charge so that they can make a shift towards hydrogen. On the other hand, the government can also take certain steps to increase the supply. For example, government has to invest much more in research and development to bring down the cost of hydrogen development, because producing hydrogen, storing it, transporting it, that is all environmental friendly, but the problem is that it comes at a big cost. The more research that we do in this area, the lesser will be the cost in the future. Secondly, the government of India can bring it under priority sector lending. That is, if you are a part of that industry which is producing hydrogen as a fuel, you should be able to go to the bank and get a loan at a much cheaper rate or very easily. That can only be done if it is a part of the priority sector lending. Government can also make it a part of the PLI, that is a production linked incentive scheme, which incentivizes the producers to produce in more quantity so that they can get certain incentives from the government. These are the ideas which have been floated here by the authors on both the sides. Now, the reason why this article is written is because of the green hydrogen policy that was released recently. So, let me tell you the main pointers of this policy and what is it that the government is trying to achieve. The main objective of the policy is that the government has set a target of 5 million tons per annum of green hydrogen to be produced by 2030. Under the policy, the government is offering to set up manufacturing zones for production connectivity to interstate transmission system. Again, a system where you can transport this fuel from one state to the other state. The government will also offer free transmission for 25 years to ensure that there's a proper infrastructure set up in the entire country for transport of this kind of a fuel. The reason why we are so keen on this policy is the Indian Oil Corporation estimates that the green hydrogen policy will eventually reduce the cost of green hydrogen production by 40 to 50%, which is a big cut in this production cost. Not just this, it will also help India in achieving the recent target that we set for ourselves, that is of going net zero carbon by 2070. Hydrogen or green hydrogen has a big part to play in that as well. Now, we have also discussed about the challenges in very brief earlier. Number one, the cost challenge. The problem is that the hydrogen that is produced right now in the country is much costlier as compared to the other sources of renewable energy. So we have to work on that. Also, transmission charges are very high for transporting the fuel from one place to the other place, so that has to be worked upon. Also, there are many states which may be reluctant to adopt hydrogen as a fuel because they are much more dependent on the power supply and the existing power distribution infrastructure. That is why the central government now has to come in and convince the states by offering them certain incentives. Also, while that was all about the policy, let me also share with you some details of hydrogen specifically purely as a fuel. As I said, the problem with hydrogen is it is so light that it rises up in the atmosphere and you cannot really find it in its pure form, and that is why you have to artificially make it. Now, there are different types of hydrogen that you would see mentioned in the news. There is grey hydrogen, there is blue hydrogen, and there is green hydrogen. We are focused mostly on the green hydrogen part because it is generated from renewable sources and we don't really have any harmful byproduct. Grey hydrogen, on the other hand, is the hydrogen that makes up India's bulk production right now. It is extracted from fossil fuels, natural gas, etc. So to obtain it, we would need to use fossil fuel, so it is not good in the long run. Also, it produces CO2, so we don't want that as a byproduct. Then we have blue hydrogen also, that is again sourced from fossil fuels only. Just the difference is that the byproduct is carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. The good part is that in this case the byproducts are captured and stored, so they are slightly better as compared to grey hydrogen. But the best one and the most sustainable one in the long run is the green hydrogen only. The next article that we have here talks about the ILO, that is the International Labour Organization's efforts to make sure that the workspaces across the world become much safer for people to come out and work and they are not under any specific pressure while they are working at their workplace. It talks about the OSH, that is the Occupational Safety and the Hazard Code, that has been introduced by the Government of India as part of codification of the labour laws, under which the government is also making efforts to convert all the workplaces across the country into safer places. Now, the reason why this article is written today is because since 2003, the World Labour Organization commemorates 28th of April, that is today, as a World Day for Safety and Health at Work. It tries to put stress on prevention of accidents and diseases at work that are faced by millions of people across the world every single year. So much so that as per the author, that globally about 2.9 million deaths and 402 million non-fatal injuries were attributed to occupational accidents and diseases. And because so many people are dying and they are not being well while working, that has also had a big economic impact. Occupational accidents and diseases have costed about 5.5% of global GDP annually. And that is why it is a need of the hour to put special attention to that, not just in India, but with countries across the world. In India specifically, although the government has introduced and tried to implement the Code of Occupational Safety and Hazard of 2020, but the problem is that most of these people who face these safety hazards at their work belong to the informal sector. See, when you are in the formal sector, let's say on an IT job or media job, etc., there's a very low chance that you would get hurt during your job or when you're in the office. But it is the people in the informal sector who have to travel. Let's say there's a Swiggy delivery boy who is coming to your house, or someone in the automobile industry. They're working in the industry that is manufacturing paints or automobiles or crackers. They are the ones who are at a much greater risk of all these kind of injuries, and they are the ones that have to be covered, especially because, as per the author, over 90% of India's workforce works in the informal sector. So there has to be special attention paid to them. Now, there are certain governments that have tried to implement good practices. The author here gives multiple examples. For example, the UP government, in cooperation with employers and workers, carried out a participatory OSH training workshop, especially for metal and garment home-based workers. Kerala government also did something similar. They applied the ILO's participatory OSH training methodology and reached out to small construction sites specifically because they are under a lot more danger to have any accidents on the site as compared to the other sectors. Then there's an example of Rajasthan government also that has done the same. So yes, on the state government basis, there are certain governments that are taking those steps, but a lot more needs to be done because this needs to be at an all India level. Because the situation is especially bad in the developing nations and not so much in the developed nations across the world. One of the other problems is that even when there is an injury at the workplace and you take the person to the doctor, many doctors don't really know how to treat those specific injuries. See, the doctors are trained to handle diseases, etc., but different workplaces can have different types of injuries and diseases. So to train the doctors regarding those occupational diseases specifically is also something that is very important, and the governments should think in that direction also. Now, because the article is mainly based on the International Labour Organization, and because the ILO celebrates this World Day for Safety and Health at Work, let's take a deep dive into how the ILO works and some important facts about the ILO. Now, ILO, interestingly, is the only UN body that is older than the UN itself. It was actually established in 1919 through the Treaty of Versailles, and it was actually a part of the League of Nations. Now, while the League of Nations dissolved, but the ILO continued and it then became a part of the UN in 1946. Also, it is the only tripartite UN agency. Tripartite means it has three representatives. One representative from the government side, second from the side of the employers, and third from the side of the workers. The ILO, in fact, also received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1969 for all its efforts. Now, another important fact about ILO is that there are a lot of conventions that they have, but out of all those, there are 8 core conventions of the ILO. These are Forced Labor Convention, Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, Equal Remuneration, Discrimination Convention, Minimum Age, Worst Form of Child Labor, Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right of Organized Convention, and the Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention. Out of these 8, do remember, India has only ratified the first 6. Okay, India has not ratified the last 2, mainly because we believe that they would not apply to government workers, people who are working for the government. That is why we have ratified the first 6 and not the last 2. Do remember the numbers as well, especially the ones that India has not ratified. The next article is about a big problem that India might face in the coming days with the decision of Indonesia government to ban the export of palm oil. Now, Indonesia and palm oil go hand in hand. Indonesia is the world's biggest producer, exporter, and even the world's biggest consumer of palm oil. Now, this decision of Indonesia government to stop the export of palm oil has become a headache for many countries across the world, especially India, because India imports huge quantity of palm oil, especially from Indonesia and Malaysia. Now, the decision of Indonesia was actually announced on 22nd of April, and would come into force from April 28, that is today. Now, the reason given by the Indonesia government is that just like countries across the world, in Indonesia also, the prices of edible oil are increased at a very, very rapid pace. And the Indonesia government believes that the exporters are sending a lot of oil outside. Maybe if they don't export the oil for some time, it will reduce the prices in the local market, and that is why the decision has been taken. Also, because the holy festival of Eid is approaching and the government wants enough quantity of edible oil to be available in the country and also affordable for the common people to buy. And that is the reasoning behind their decision. It is not really based on India, it is based on what is happening within their own country. Now, across the world, especially after the Ukraine-Russia crisis, the global food prices have been increasing. In fact, the food prices rose by about 13% globally in March, and palm oil had a major role to play in that. Palm oil is the world's most widely used vegetable oil and has a global production of about 73 million tons. In fact, the history of palm oil with Indonesia goes a long way back. It is said in the 19th century it was the Dutch that first introduced the palm oil in Indonesia, and after that the country has carried on its production for a long time. Today Indonesia and Malaysia together make up of 90% of the global palm oil production. After palm oil, the other most used edible oils in the world include the soybean oil, the canola oil and the sunflower oil. Now the interesting part is that in every country that produces these oils in major quantity, there have been certain problems. So we have read about how there is a problem of palm oil in Indonesia. Then we have a problem of soybean oil in Argentina that produces soybean oil in very large quantity. Then canola oil that is mainly produced in Canada also had a problem of drought the last year. Because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the sunflower oil production also has reduced. So it's kind of a perfect storm. Perfect storm means a condition where everything that can possibly go wrong is actually going wrong. And that is why now there is a problem in most of those countries that import palm oil from Indonesia, which includes India also in large numbers. Now Indonesia is not lying when it says that the prices of palm oil within the country have also increased. For example, in March 2021, the palm oil in Indonesia was about 14,000 Indonesian rupee. That increased to 22,000 in March this year. So over a 50% hike in just one single year. And the government of Indonesia, before banning the export, also took multiple steps. For example, they put a price cap first to make sure that the MRP of the branded oil does not increase. Then they put a cap on how much crude palm oil can be exported. They first put a cap of 20% and then they said, okay, you can only export till 30% of your production. But even then, the government of Indonesia was not able to control the price hike of palm oil in the country. One of the other reasons is that in Indonesia, the palm oil is not just used for edible products, it is also used as green diesel. So the consumption of palm oil within Indonesia also is very high. And that is why the government eventually decided to ban the entire export of palm oil. Now, if you look at it from India's side, we have a big problem on our hands. India is the biggest importer of palm oil and it makes up 40% of all the vegetable oil consumption in the country. And most of our needs of palm oil actually comes from Indonesia only. Now, earlier we had requested Indonesia to increase the supply and to make sure that we have constant supply of palm oil. But now because a blanket ban has been imposed on the export of palm oil, India would very quickly have to look for alternatives now. The other problem is, despite increasing prices, our palm oil imports are just increasing rather than decreasing. So demand in India also is increasing because the food patterns in India and the things that we consume day to day have a lot of oil in them. You talk about parathas, you talk about pakoda, you talk about any delicacy that we make in our homes, mostly these are fried. And that is why the need for edible oil in India is also at a very high level, and that is why we might see this problem becoming even bigger in the future. Now, just to tell you certain impact of what would happen. There was a report in the Financial Express that said that India's import bill for edible oil can jump by over $2 billion now because of the problems in the global market. India has asked Russia for importing more sunflower oil and also Argentina, but to replace the entire supply of Indonesia will be very difficult. Not just this, if you actually see, out of the four most used oils that are used in India in the kitchen, palm oil has the largest fraction of all of these. So the problem with palm oil will hurt India the most as compared to other oils, be it the sunflower oil, mustard oil, soybean oil, etc. Now, the problem with mustard oil is not that much because mustard oil is produced in India also to a good extent. But in kitchens and most of the things, because mustard oil has a bit of a bitter taste, we prefer palm oil. And that is why some policy decisions now have to be taken by the government. The other part of the problem is that we have known for a long time that we are dependent on countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia to import edible oil. We have been trying to increase the production of edible oil within the country, but that has not happened. If you see the numbers here, you will see that India's domestic vegetable oil production has been almost stagnant since 2015-16, when the production was about 7.5 million tons, to 2020-21, when production reached about 9.5 million tons. So there has not been a great increase in the domestic production, while the increase in demand has been very, very robust. Now, what the government has done in the past few months is, the government came up with National Mission on Edible Oil, specifically palm oil. The objective of this mission was to harness domestic edible oil prices dictated by the expensive palm oil imports. So the aim was that in the long run, we will increase our domestic palm oil production to 3 times to 11 lakh million tons by 2025-26. But again, for such a policy to come on paper and for it to give results on the ground, there is a very large gap between the two. On the other hand, there has to be immediate decision taken about the import of palm oil from nations across the world. As per this policy, special focus would be put on India's northeastern states and Andaman and Nicobar Islands due to the conducive weather conditions for palm oil in this region. The next article that we have here is focusing on the well-being of children. The author here is saying that as per some research reports that have come out recently, many countries across the world, including India, might not really achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially that are aimed at children. In 2019, there were 86 lakh deaths occurring amongst children and adolescents till the age of 20 years, which is a very, very high number considering that there have been a lot of advancements made in the field of science and technology, especially the medical science. The research report says that the countries across the world need to focus on mental health to address unintentional injuries, non-communicable diseases, and also not to neglect the tropical diseases which are impacting the lives of the children across the world. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously has also had a major role to play in pushing the countries back from the progress that they had already made. But do understand that this number of 86 lakh deaths is of 2019, that is the pre-pandemic era. So you can't put the blame on the pandemic only. Yes, after the pandemic, the numbers would have gone even worse. But even before the pandemic, nations across the world were never really on track to achieve their sustainable development goals, especially with respect to children. Children have different kind of needs, be it education, be it nutrition, be it health, and we need to put special focus on that. Now, if you actually see how India is performing, I have taken out data from the site of the UNICEF, especially about what is the performance of India in terms of the sustainable development goals related to children. So there are different themes on which this data is given. Survive plus thrive, learning, protection, environment, and fair chance. If you actually see here, the only category where we seem to be doing good is the survive and thrive. The dark blue color shows that we are on track. Survive and thrive means that we have been able to decrease our mortality rate. We have been able to ensure that there is good amount of nutrition given at centers such as Anganwadi or in the form of the midday meal. But when it comes to other areas such as learning, protection, even environment, we have not really been on track. In case of environment especially, there's a lot of acceleration that is required. Also, if you look at the sustainable development goals, it is the goal number 4 especially, which talks about quality education, which has a direct connection with the children. So let me tell you what exactly is the goal as per the SDG number 4 and a bit about India's progress. So in India, the net enrollment ratio in the primary education for boys and girls has reached 100%, While at the national level, the youth literacy rate is 94% for males and 92% for females. The new national education policy that has been released by the government aims to take forward the Sustainable Development Goal number 4. Now, the main targets of Sustainable Development Goal 4 include these. The target is that by 2030, all these things will be achieved. Some of them include ensuring that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, quality primary and secondary education, to substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical, vocational skills, decent jobs, entrepreneurship, to ensure that we substantially increase the supply of qualified teachers through international cooperation for teacher training, etc. So if there's a question in the examination with respect to India's progress made in the SDG, you would do well to quote certain government schemes, missions or agreements that India has signed with other nations to ensure all these things. These are the articles we want to discuss on the Hindu newspaper today. A couple of practice questions. Number 1. What are the major objectives of the National Mission on Edible Oil - Palm Oil? How would this ensure lowering of India's dependence on edible oil import in the long run? Second, make a case for focusing more on hydrogen-run vehicles as part of a sustainable future rather than on electric battery-run vehicles. Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.